us. I'm going to take a few minutes to explain how to use the GoToWebinar technology. In particular, I'm going to show you some of the features that will allow us to make our presentation more interactive. You should see the control panel pictured on your screen right now. If you don't, it's because it has been minimized, and you can pull it back out by going to the Grab tab, which hides and shows the control panel. There is also an attendee list where you can see all of the participants on the call during this webinar. For today's webinar, we will not be enabling individual audio. So if you have a question, feel free to type your question into the question pane, and I can read it to the group or respond to you privately. All of the panes can be expanded or minimized by clicking on the plus or minus buttons that are at the top left of each pane. It's a little after 12:30, so we're going to give a few more minutes to people to join the webinar, and then we'll get started shortly. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to today's Data Insight webinar. Is it time to pivot? An introduction to Excel PivotTables. My name is Laurie Haycock, and I am the Director of Data Innovation at Achieving the Dream. Joining me today is my colleague, Allison Ray, the Assistant Director of Data Coaching and Data Strategy. Allison was instrumental in making today's webinar possible, and I would like to thank Allison, as well as thanking all of you for joining us today. Briefly reviewing the agenda, I'm going to start by introducing our new Data Insight webinar series. Then we'll showcase our feature presentation on pivot tables by Dr. Rene Garcia. Then we'll move into a 15-minute question and answer and discussion period, followed by a discussion of our future Data Insight webinars. Right, today is the first inaugural session in our new Data Insight webinar series, and the need for this series really grew out of Achieving the Dream's recognition that we need to help colleges build data capacity and leverage data as a strategic asset. We plan to offer these every 4 to 6 weeks, and they'll be focused on a variety of topics to help build your data culture to support your student success efforts. We invite you to follow us on Twitter at Achieve the Dream and to join in the conversation using hashtag #ATD_data. Today's webinar will be recorded and accessible on the ATD YouTube channel for on-demand viewing. All of our Data Insight webinars, our Industry Insight webinars, our Leader College webinars are available on that channel. If you have suggestions for a particular topic or would like to be a presenter, please contact Allison Ray at aray@achievingthedream.org. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenter and pivoter, Dr. Rene Garcia. Rene is an Achieving the Dream data coach. He's the Director of Enrollment Management at Miami-Dade College, and he's also a course mentor for the AIR Data and Decisions Academy. Rene, welcome, and please take it from here.
All right, thank you very much. Throughout human history, there have been critical events: the discovery of fire, then the invention of the wheel, and in my mind, the next one is the creation of the pivot table. A pivot table lets you summarize very large amounts of data in the form of a table, no matter how you have it laid out on your spreadsheet. You can actually drag and drop variables, in other words, columns, to create a tabular display of your data. One of the neatest things is that they can be created on the fly. You can modify them easily, and allows you to play the role of mythbuster at meetings. It's an excellent way to call somebody a liar and then be in a position to back it up. We're going to cover the requirements for a pivot table, creating a pivot table with one variable, using filters, adding a second variable to a pivot table, and also how to calculate percentages. All the data in this demonstration are hypothetical. This means that they're made up and bears no resemblance to any institution, living or dead. In this demonstration, we're going to use 3 examples. We're going to answer the question, what proportion of students register by major? What is the course placement in mathematics for students who do register? And what is the conversion rate for students? In other words, of those who apply, how many actually register? Hopefully at this point you can see my screen. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and begin. The only real requirement for a pivot table is that you have no blank columns. In other words, all your columns must be contiguous. That's pretty much the only requirement. And we're going to start with the first question, what proportion of students register by major? So the first thing we're going to do is going to highlight our data, and I'm going to do that by hitting Control A. By the way, there's a number of ways some of these things can be done. I'm simply going to use the one I use most frequently. So I'm going to hit Control A, and now all the data are highlighted. I'm going to go to the top and click on the Insert table, and then I'm going to click on the Pivot table on the extreme left-hand side. A dialog box opens allowing you to indicate where you want the pivot table located. The default is in a new tab, and that is what I mostly do. So I'm just going to hit OK. On the right-hand side, you will see the list of pivot table fields available. As fields are selected, they will populate the blank square on the left. This is the actual pivot table. And below the fields is where you will actually drag and drop the fields. So I'm going to start by dragging student ID into the values field. You'll see that says sum of student ID. Oh, I definitely don't want that. What I want is the count. So I'm going to click on sum of student ID. Then I'm going to click on value field settings. And you'll see that sum is highlighted. I'm going to highlight count and hit OK. So now we have just a hair less than 4,900 records. Okay. Now we're looking for the students' programs or their major. So that will be the program title. And I'm going to drop it down below under rows. Okay. Okay. Now you have a listing of how many students we have by each major. However, we wanted to know the percent who register by program. So we're going to go back to the pivot table list and scroll down a little bit and find when it says registered. Okay. And we're going to place that in the columns box. See how the pivot table now changed? So now I have the number of students by major and whether or not they actually register for that particular semester. However, we're looking for the percent registered for each program. Before I do that, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to copy the contents of column D into column E. Notice that what I'm going to do now here is hit the right key, right-click, paste special, and mark values and number formats. This releases the numbers from being tied to a pivot table. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and change these values into percents. I go down to the values box. I click count of student ID. I hit value field settings. I'm going to go to the show value as tab. I'm going to click where it says no calculation, and I'm going to select percent of row total, and I'm going to hit OK. Now you see that my numbers have changed into percents. Now I'm going to narrow the column and center the data to make it a little easier to read, because like in cooking, presentation is everything. I'm also going to format these three columns to get rid of the decimal places. They usually don't add much, so I'm going to do that in the usual way you change the format in an Excel file. I'm going to right click, go to Format Cells, I'll click on percent, down to 0 decimal places, and hit OK. So now you see that for accounting, 68% of the 192 students registered. In architecture, it's 74% of all the students who registered. You see that it's very important to give context to the percent by having the total number of students involved. So we know that 68% represents is from the 192 students who are majoring in accounting. Now we're going to add a filter. So we're going to create a new pivot table. Before I do that, I'm going to double click the title so that I can remember what I did here, and I'm going to call this registration by program, because it's very easy to get lost and not remember which pivot table is which. So I'm going to go back to the data tab. You see that our data are already highlighted. I'm going to click insert again, as well as pivot table. I get the dialog box that tells me where the pivot table is going to reside. I'm going to make it into a new tab. I'm going to go ahead and double click here at the bottom so we can give this a name. And in this instance, we're going to be looking at math placement. So I'm going to label it as such. Okay. Once again, I'm going to go to student ID and place it down in the values. You see that I still have sum of IDs. That's not what I want. So I'm going to click on that, go to value field settings, hit count, hit OK, and I am back to the 4,800 students, 4,900 students that we have. So we're interested in math placement. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit and find placement in math, put it down in rows. So here are the courses these students have placed. Notice that we have some students with no scores. But remember, what we really wanted here wasn't just where students placed, but where did registered students place. And we're going to get that information by using a filter. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the list of fields. I'm going to take registered and bring it down to the box labeled filters. I'm going to go to row 1 and I'm going to click the arrow, I'm going to select multiple items. I'm going to hit OK. Oops, sorry. I'm going to mark all. Then I'm going to hit yes, and I'm going to hit OK. Now what we're showing is the placement for students who have registered. Remember, we're looking for the percent, but before I calculate that, I'm going to cheat again. I'm going to highlight column B, that gives me the totals. I'm going to copy that to column C. I'm going to right click, mark paste special, and then hit the values and number format. Once again, this is to separate the numbers from the pivot table. Like I did before, I'm going to go back and now convert the numbers into percents. I'm going to go down to the values box. I'm going to click count of student ID. I'm going to hit value field settings. I'm going to go to the tab that says show value as. I'm going to mark no calculation. And in this case, I'm going to hit percent of row columns because we're going vertical. And then I'm going to hit OK. And now you see that the numbers have changed into percents, but I still have the cell size because I copied that in column C. Once again, I generally find the decimal places annoying, so I'm going to try to get rid of them by simply formatting the cells, marking percentage, and going down to 0 decimal places and hit OK. The decimal places have disappeared. I'm going to go ahead and center the data. And now we have the answer to our question. By percent and by number, what was the math placement for students who registered? Now for our last example, we're going to try to determine the conversion rate. That simply means of those students who applied, how many actually registered. So I'm going to go back to the Data tab. You see that our data has already been highlighted. I'm going to click on Insert and on Pivot Table. And just like before, I'm going to keep it in a new worksheet. I'm going to hit OK. I get the blank pivot table, the list of fields on the right, and where I'm going to place them at the bottom. Okay. In this case, we obviously start with student IDs. We still have the sum. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to account like I've done before. Then I'm going to look for the variable that shows whether the student has registered or not, put down in the rows. And since we want the percent, we're going to convert these in a couple of minutes. But just like I have done before, I'm going to copy over the total column. Again, using paste special and the values and number formats to separate the numbers from the pivot table. I am going to go back and now change these into a percent, doing it exactly the same way. Click on Count of Student ID, Value Field Settings, Show Value As, okay. Click on No Calculation, and select percent of row, percent of column total. Once again, we're going to get rid of the decimal places. Down to 0 decimal places. Now we have the percent. Okay. Now we're going to center the data, makes it a little easier to see. I'm going to enhance it a little bit more by adding the commas to this column to make it again easier to read. So I highlight it, right-click, Format Cells, select Number, use the comma separator, get rid of decimal places, and hit OK. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some nice lines. And now this pivot table is ready to serve. And this kind of concludes the demo of the 3 examples that we discussed.
Thank you so much, Rene, for that wonderful introduction to Excel PivotTables. Apologies to the audience for the slight lag. We were in the midst of changing screens and making sure we landed on the right page. Following Rene's presentation, his presentation was supposed to be interactive, a very brief demo to just an introduction to Excel PivotTables, but we also wanted to provide our webinar viewers with a few more resources that might be helpful in exploring more advanced pivot table use, and also how you can use pivot tables to build a culture of evidence at your college. So if you see on your screen, we have a few resources. The first one I would like to mention is the AIR Data and Decisions Academy. There's a link from this webinar to their website. The Data and Decisions Academy, if you're not familiar, is a series of online self-paced courses designed for community college institutional research professionals. Courses are accessible without travel or special software and are designed for very busy employees who need on-the-job training without having to travel. You'll see right under that, we've listed Dr. Garcia's course that he mentors, Longitudinal Tracking for Institutional Research, which he utilizes the Excel PivotTable in that course. We've also listed the Achieving the Dream Scholarship for all IR professionals and institutions where the deadline is April 6, 2015. We've linked the scholarship so you can click on that and get more details about the courses that would be available. These scholarships are going to be offered for members of the Achieving the Dream institutions and are awarded towards the completion of 2 academy courses selected by the participant. So like I said, you can click on that link and get more information about the 2 courses that you potentially could take and all of that scholarship information that is available to you as an ATD member. Also, we want to direct you to the Microsoft Office online support. This link should take you directly to their support site. You can type in Excel PivotTable and it will bring up several resources, articles, just basic how to use a pivot table to more advanced questions that you might have. We do understand that our time today was very limited, so this was really supposed to be a very introductory question, or I'm sorry, a very introductory presentation. So next, we are going to jump into a Q&A and discussion section with Dr. Garcia. We understand some of your questions might be technical, so we're just going to see what we get in from you guys, and we'll be switching back to his screen if we need to. So first, our first question that has come in, I'm going to read it out to you, Rene. So let's see. And also to our audience, just as a reminder, please type your questions into the question pane, and then we will facilitate them to Rene. And also, his contact information is here listed on the screen, so that if we weren't able to get to your question, feel free to reach out to Dr. Garcia with your question, and he would be happy to try to answer it. So our first question is wondering if when you're using the pivot table, if you want to see another view of the data but not lose it, how can you copy or clone the pivot table without losing the original?
Okay, that's relatively easy, and if I can have control back, maybe it's better to show it than to say it.
Sure, I'm passing over control.
Okay, hopefully you guys can see my screen again. This was the very last pivot table that we created. So all I'm going to do to clone it is I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to use a little bit of brute force and simply just highlight columns A, B, and C. I'm going to right-click and copy. Now I'm going to go down to the very bottom and create a new tab by hitting the plus sign. So now you see that it says Sheet 4. I'm going to go to column A. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to copy. And that is the exact replica of the pivot table we had before, but we want to do something different. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to move the registered field back to the list at the top. And for instance, I'm going to, and by the way, since it was a complete replica, I got to get rid of these numbers once I change the fields. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of them. Okay. And I'm going to put, let's say, high school GPA by classification. So as you can see here, now we have the students by their high school GPA, so that 28% are between 2.0 and 2.99, and 36% are between 3.0 and 3.99. Now let's say you want to add a second variable. Can we do that by whether you're registered or not? Okay. And we're going to have to change the percents. Here we're doing the percents for the column. We want to do rows. So I'm going to go down to count of student ID, value field settings, show values as. I'm going to hit the percent column, which we brought over from our previous table. Now I'm going to do the rows, and I'm going to hit OK. So there you are. In this case, 74% of the students in the first GPA classification did not register. That's how you clone a pivot table. I guess like they say in the talk shows, back to you, Allison.
Thanks, Rene. We have actually gotten quite a few more questions, so I'm going to try to take them as they came in. If we don't get your question, I will make sure to get your question to Rene, and hopefully he can follow up with you. So our next question, let's see. All right, so can information from one spreadsheet be combined to create a single pivot table?
I think the answer is yes, but I have not done it. Part of the issue with that is making sure that the data align. And generally, when I have data in separate spreadsheets, I try to merge them and use the pivot table from there, mostly by using the append command, I believe, in Excel. But quite frankly, I try to stay away from doing it in that fashion, but I do believe it is technically possible.
Okay, great. And that might be that sounds to me like something that would be useful for a Google search or something you might be able to find on Microsoft Office's support site. So I would recommend you checking that out too. Our next question is about graph creation. Is it possible to create graphs from the data that you're using in PivotTables?
The short answer is yes, and it's pretty much done the same way that you would do a table on a regular spreadsheet. Let me see if I'm brave enough to try it here. There it is. And let me repeat that because I may have gone too fast. Here's the pivot table. Okay. I went to insert, and I quite frankly picked the first chart style, which is a bar graph. I clicked on it. Whoops. Or at least I'm trying to click on it. And there it is. And of course you can move it just like you normally would any table, and you can enhance it and move around the legend and things of that nature.
Okay, great. And I just wanted to mention I just received a question about the webinar being made available online, which it will be. So if you have to leave here shortly, we will have a follow-up email and link sent out separately with the YouTube link to this webinar and also some follow-up information with the presentation. Our next question is, let's see, is there a benefit to using pivot tables over SPSS?
Oh, the short answer is yes. And the biggest advantage is you don't have to import the data into SPS into a pivot table to make it work. And not only that, but not everyone has SPSS X on a laptop. And any laptop that has a Microsoft Office, you can pretty much use to do a pivot table. And it can get very, very, very sophisticated. And the biggest advantage, again, is you do it on the fly, point and click, pretty straightforward. So I think it's the ease of use and the ability to be able to change the displays on the fly. And I know that SPSS X as well as SAS they have point and click capabilities, but you still need to do some prep work to have it displayed. And with an Excel spreadsheet, you can just do it from there.
Great. Our next question is the following. So as an ATD data coach, what type of data analysis would you recommend ATD colleges to use? A pivot table on setting our ATD data. What other areas can we compare because, let's see, what other areas can we compare because of what you presented? Does that make sense, Rene? I'm reading this over again.
You want to try that one again?
No, it's okay. Why don't you give it a shot?
Okay. If I understood correctly, you're looking for what kind of data to analyze. Well, ATD has 5 indicators, which include things like performance in developmental education courses, gateway courses, and so on, all disaggregated by certain demographic variables such as ethnicity and gender and income. Pell status is a good proxy for that. And obviously those lend themselves usually very easily to an Excel spreadsheet, and it is very easy to create a pivot table. If you want to use a graph of some kind, let me talk you out of a pie chart. They are really hard to get a handle on, especially if your slices are small. So I'm not sure if I have addressed the question, Allison.
I think you did. If she wants to send me a follow-up question, I can send it back to you, more clarification.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Our next question, let's see. Can you create a bar graph from the pivot table and the additional column that is not actually part of the pivot table?
Okay, the short answer is yes. I think we have one on the screen now. I'm not sure I understood the last part about the last column not being there. Because she probably, in a bar chart, you don't want to include a column D here. Let me move this to the side. You probably don't want to include that at all. It doesn't add anything to your table. So what we're showing here is really the data that comes from columns B and C.
Okay, great. Let's see. Our next question is there a way to merge two pivot tables together without removing or altering the data?
That I don't know. But again, when I'm drawing data from two different files, my bias is to put them into one. It becomes a lot more flexible when you do that, because most of the time you're not simply looking for one additional pivot table. You may do a lot more, and there are a few more steps when you do something like that. So I don't know if we can merge two pivot tables, but you can definitely add the variables, and perhaps the net effect would be the same.
Okay, great. And I would also recommend, that also seems to me like a question that might be able to get more clarification through Microsoft support, just to see how to be able to merge that data. All right, well, it looks like we are out of questions for now. Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia, for spending your afternoon with us talking about your insight into Excel pivot tables. We really appreciate it. And so I am going to switch back over to my screen and provide you guys another link. Let's see. All right. So again, thank you, Dr. Garcia. We'd like to thank him so much for his time, and also encourage everyone on the webinar to stay tuned for the details and topics for our next Data Insight webinar in April. All of our future webinars will be advertised in the ATD newsletters and through targeted emails. We want to thank you as the attendee for taking your afternoon with us to learn more about pivot tables and how you can use them in your student success efforts. We would like for you to take a minute to provide your input on this webinar and share your suggestions for future topics, content areas, and presenters in a brief evaluation. Someone sent in a question not too long ago saying that they were having trouble accessing the links that we've included throughout the webinar. Like I mentioned earlier, I will be sending out a separate email with this PowerPoint presentation, the link to the YouTube channel where you can view this presentation again, and also an email with all of the AIR scholarship information for the Data and Decisions Academy. So hang in there. It should be coming in tomorrow, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you, Dr. Garcia and Lori from Achieving the Dream, and we hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks for tuning in.